In this video, I'm going to survive 100 days in Minecraft Cobblemon. Our challenges will be to complete the Kanto region, from capturing the best Pokémon, defeating all the gym leaders, winning the Pokémon League, and beating the greatest trainer of all time, Red. And to accomplish all of this, we have a 100-day limit. Stay until the end of the video. And we begin our Pokémon adventure. We're right where we left off in the last video, where we became the best trainer in the Johto region. If you haven't seen the video yet, I'll leave it in the recommended section and in the comments. Now that we've beaten the Pokémon League, Professor ELM has given us a ferry ticket, which will take us directly to Kanto, so let's go. Once I got to the ferry, I boarded it. It was very large and luxurious. I started talking to some people and immediately had my first battles. I accepted each battle to strengthen my Pokémon, as several gym leaders with very powerful Pokémon were waiting for us. I found a slightly strange room. I wonder what use they gave it. There were too many rooms, most of them empty, and others with trainers waiting for a duel. The journey to Kanto had begun, and a new world awaited me. The truth is, I had a great time during the trip. I even went inside a pool on the ferry. We had finally arrived in the Kanto region. I only had 100 days to complete all the challenges, and especially upon reaching day 100, I had to face Red, so I got to work. The first city I visited was Carmine City, as the ferry arrived directly here. I remind you that this Kanto adventure is from the perspective of the Gold and Silver games. I explored the city, looking for some advice, Easter egg, or something important for our adventure, but I only got a rare candy in the Pokémon fan club, so I decided to go directly to defeat our first gym leader. Upon entering, I realized that the leader is none other than Sergeant Surge, an electric-type leader. So I began to defeat the trainers that were in the gym. I decided to use Tyranitar as my first option due to its resistance to electric attacks and its enormous strength. Since this is my first gym, I would start with the Pokémons that I already had from Johto, but as we progress we will change Pokémons. Once all the trainers were defeated, it was time to challenge Surge. I would start with my Tyranitar, and Surge would send out his classic Raichu, small but powerful. However, he would switch to a Magneton, which he would end up defeating. An Electabuzz would be the next test. I noticed that the level of his Pokémon was far superior compared to the Johto leaders. Tyranitar was able to defeat most of his Pokémon, but it would be defeated. He would immediately send out Dragonite. He knew it would also be somewhat resistant to electric attacks. And he would defeat Surge. We had it. Our first badge was ours. We had defeated Surge. We had one badge. We still have 7 more to go. This was just beginning. After defeating Surge, I headed down Route 6 to go to Saffron City. And I had some battles along the way. Not bad to gain experience because Surge made me realize the level of the Pokémon in Kanto had, and that was how I got to Saffron City, a very big city. Exploring it took me some time. Unfortunately, not all the secondary missions as we know them in the original Pokémon games were available, so after checking every last corner I went to the gym. Here there were some platforms which teleported you to another area, where I had to face several leaders and thus go looking for Sabrina, the gym leader. After several battles I found the location of Sabrina, the leader of psychic Pokémons. So we began the duel. I would initially go with Dragonite, hoping that it would be resistant to Sabrina's attacks. Dragonite turned out to be somewhat resilient due to his great strength. He was almost defeated, but we managed to defeat Sabrina. And with that, we would take the Swamp Badge with us. Once I defeated Sabrina, I headed east of the city along Route 7, this way I would quickly reach Celadon City, which was located next to the previous city. I explored the city in search of mysteries and adventure, and found the casino, which had previously belonged to Team Rocket. But it was already empty. Big Pokémon fans will know why. Once I explored the town I headed to the gym. Just outside there was a lecherous old man spying on the trainers. It reminded me a lot of Jiraiya and his old tricks. I entered the gym and noticed that all the trainers had grass-type Pokémon, so this would be an easy task for our molters. By the way, I will try to capture the rest of the legendary birds in this video. After having won all the duels with molters, I had arrived with Erica, of course. I started the challenge with molters. Although the levels of our Pokémon weren't that different, molters proved to be the legendary Pokémon that it was, thus defeating all of Erica's Pokémon. Now we had the rainbow badge with us. I advanced along Route 17 in search of the next city, where there were metalheads and motorcyclists waiting to be humiliated by my Pokémon, and after a long journey I had arrived at Fuchsia City. Until now 4 days had passed since the challenge, and for the moment I had not found any Pokémon that were of great interest to me, so until now I continued with the same team, a great advantage since they had a good level, and that way I didn't spend so much time training new Pokémon from scratch. But as soon as I found Pokémon that were of interest to me, I would begin the test of training them, and they would arrive at the same time as my current Pokémon. Once I explored Fuchsia, I would enter the gym. Here all the trainers were dressed the same, as if they were ninjas or something, and the challenge was to find the true gym leader, Janin. I was surprised that the entrees had very strong Pokémon, but they weren't that much of a rival. And finally, after defeating all the trainers, I had found Janin. I would start with my Feraligatr, which until now hadn't had a leading role, so I put it at the head of the team for a while. And then I would send Molters, even though it had been poisoned, slowly losing its life, but its fire attacks were perfect for defeating Janin's bug Pokémon, thus having the victory in my pocket. We now had the Soul Badge and a total of 4 badges. We were halfway there. The next city to visit would be Light Blue, so I set off. Along the way, I battled several trainers, and I remembered I had an Abrat in my box, so I decided to train it a bit. Which quickly became a Kadabra. We had arrived at Celeste City, the city where Misty, the famous leader of the water Pokémon, was located, and I remember very well that to one side was the Celeste Cave, a cave where one of the most powerful Pokémon lies. Obviously I'm referring to the powerful Mewtwo, but I'll wait to collect all the badges to visit the cave. So I went straight to challenge Misty, of course, but first I faced the trainers guarding the place. Being a water-type gym, I used Ampharos, my strongest electric Pokémon. At least up until that point. Thanks to Ampharos I was able to get past all the trainers in the gym. And that was how I got to Misty. She would send Golduck and switch for Lapras, which I defeated easily, then she would send a Quasar. So I had to switch Pokémon since it was immune to electric attacks, so I sent Ho-Oh. It wasn't very useful against water Pokémon, but it at least resisted their attacks, although it was finally defeated. I chose to go with Ampharos and use normal attacks to weaken its Quagsire. Golduck would finish defeating Ampharos, so I would send my powerful Dragonite, which had an electric attack. Perfect for the situation. With Dragonite I would finish defeating the rest of Misty's Pokémon. And now I had the Waterfall badge in my hands. Leaving, I remembered that on one side of the city it was an old power plant. I was wondering if we could find Zapdos there, so I went to the west of the city, in front of some trainers, and I swam a bit to get to the power plant. Upon entering I noticed that it was smaller than I remembered. Apparently Red had already taken all the action in this place. Disappointed I left the plant, but I wasn't expecting what was next. Right next to the power plant I saw a very peculiar tail. It was the legendary Zapdos. I went immediately and it almost escaped me, but I quickly started a fight against it. Now I had to take my time to weaken it, but without defeating it, since if I defeated it, it would disappear. So this took me a while. My Pokeballs were running out. I had forgotten to get more for the adventure, but after leaving Zapdos at 15% health and using Ho-Oh, I would finally manage to capture it. I already had 2 of the 3 legendary birds. I would only need Articuno to have the complete collection. I returned to Celeste City and wanted to visit Bill's house to see what curiosity I could find, but to do that I had to defeat many trainers. which were not a great challenge. When I arrived at Bill's house, I found his grandfather, who asked me if I knew a yellow Pokémon with the red bubbles. I honestly don't know what Pokémon this refers to, but if you do, leave it in the comments. Let's see who's the first to guess. I went back along the path where the center was to enter the cave that connects to Lavender Town. It was a very dark cave, so I used the flash move. In the cave, I found several Pokémon I liked and managed to capture, such as Mashak, Quayaban, Kangaskhan, Marok, and even an Onix. Leaving the cave, I faced some trainers, and finally, I had arrived at Lavender Town. The famous town. Home to various ghost Pokémon, we all know the story of the famous Son that plagued Japanese children in the original version of the game. After recovering my Pokémon, I went to investigate Lavender Tower. This tower, at least in the first games, had several ghost Pokémon. And a small mission to defeat the spirit of a Marowak mother, but it seems that in this version that was over. A shame, since there was nothing in the city. I went south where several trainers were fishing. So I strengthened my Pokémon by doing different battles. But I didn't expect what was about to happen. I wanted to go swimming to see what Pokémon could come out and that were of interest to me, and I couldn't believe it. A Squirtle was swimming very comfortably in the depths. I couldn't pass up the opportunity to capture it. I sent my Heracross, which had a low level. Perfect to just weaken Squirtle. Later I put it to sleep with Polygrat. Thanks to this strategy, one would manage to capture it. It was level 25, so it was ready to evolve into its second phase, but I decided to wait a little longer and train it with the team. Continuing on my way, a fisherman gave me a super fishing rod. Great, I said, even though I already had 2 water-type Pokémon that would surely be part of my final team. Route 13 had plenty of trainers. Perfect for leveling up Squirt. By this point, I had also decided to train my Rhyhorn and evolve it into a powerful Rhydon. I would take Squirt with me as long as its size allowed. I had found a trainer who was a huge fan of Pikachus. So much so that his clothing and entire team were only Pikachus. I told him to give me one, but the jealous man didn't give me one. I had to return to Vermilion City because Diglett Cave was located there, which connected to the following cities. But before entering, I evolved into Squirt, which was already at level 47. More than enough to reach its final phase, and that's how I had my first Blastoise. It was super formidable. On one side of the Diglett Cave I had seen some Hypnos, so I wanted to catch one. Do you already know the disturbing story of Hypno? If you don't know it, good for you. On the way I remembered that in the original games there was a sleeping Snorlax, so I headed to the exact location, and indeed there was an obese Snorlax sleeping on the road. Of course, here at least I didn't have to use a poke flute to wake it up. I wanted to jump on its tummy, but before I could do it I had already woken it up, so I decided to capture it. I would use the same technique. Weaken it and make it sleep. It took me a little work, but Snorlax would be all ours, and now I would really enter the Diglett Cave. While the adventure had to continue. By this point I was already on day 32, so I still felt confident in completing the challenge. After leaving the Diglett Cave I headed to Silver City. First I went to the Fossil Museum to see if some charitable soul would give me a fossil, but everyone was very stingy and I left with the empty hands. How cheap, I said. After checking out the city, I went to the gym where I would be looking for Brock, the famous rock Pokémon trainer, but first, I faced his trainers, all of whom had very good Pokémon. But because of the type advantage, it was easy to get past them. Now it was time to face Brock. Brock would send out some Pokémon I didn't know he had. The son of a bitch had a Kabutops on his team, which would defeat my Blastoise, so he would send out Feraligatr. With plenty of strength, it would defeat the rest of Brock's Pokémon, including his famous invincible Onix. We had won the Rock Badge, we only needed 2 more badges to have them all. So I headed south through the Green Forest, and as expected there were many insect hunters that I had to face. Strengthening my Blastoise more and more. After defeating one of these rare ones I saw something majestic, a Bulbasaur in the meadows. I could not believe that there was the possibility of having the Kanto starters. As you already know, I did not pass up the opportunity and captured Bulbasaur, which was at level 25. It would take me time, but I would also dedicate myself to training it. Now I had a Bulbasaur and a Blastoise. I would only need to find a Charmander, but where would I find one? That would be the question that would flutter in my head for a long time. I defeated some more hunters and finally managed to get out of the forest. I was tired because there were many Wibble Wonderbool in the forest. After continuing to advance south, I would reach Green City. In Red's adventure, the gym leader was the leader of Team Rocket called Giovanni, very well known, but as I remembered after being defeated by Red, the new trainer would be Blue, Red's old rival. So I wanted to go face him and see how powerful he would be, the rival of the famous legend. When I entered, I noticed that there were no trainers other than Blue. Well, I'll get out of here faster, I said. I chose my team and we would begin the duel. I would start with Tyranitar and he with Executor, although I would change it for Machop, so a duel of brute force would begin. Although my Tyranitar would win, he would immediately send a formidable Rhydon, which managed to defeat my invincible Tyranitar, so I would send Blastoise. But I would change Blue for a Pidgeot. I almost defeated Blastoise, but no. Immediately a Gyarados rose strongly before me, which would defeat my Blastoise, so I would summon my legendary Zapdos, which I would manage to defeat. Arcanine would be the next Pokémon to defeat. It would be complicated and they would almost defeat my Zapdos, but I would defeat their Pokémon. Finally I would send his Rhydon, which would defeat Zapdos. So to conclude, I sent Feraligatr and with his enormous strength he would defeat Rhydon. I must admit it. Blue was a very strong leader and I would see why he was once Red's rival, but we would manage to win the Earth badge. I only needed one more badge, but first I had to get to Pallet Town. That's right. The mythical town where Red and Ash Ketchup's adventures began. Explore the town visiting Red's house, talking to his mother who comments that she hasn't seen Red in a long time, visit Blue's house and finally go to Professor Ouk's laboratory. And I really didn't expect what was next. Ook, seeing that we were completing the Pokédex, would give us the choice of one of the 3 Kanto starter Pokémon. It couldn't be. Ook, without knowing it, gave us the opportunity to have all 3 starters. Since I obviously chose Charmander, even though his level was only 5. So it would surely take me a long time and a lot of work to be able to match his level with the rest. Luckily I still had the experienced dealer who would help me a lot in this task. To get to the last city I had nothing to do south of Pallet Town, where I took every opportunity to train my Pokémon, especially to strengthen Charmander, and so after many battles I had reached Canela Island where the last gym I needed was located. But first I entered the Pokémon Mansion to see what we could find, and well, I found several trainers, several wild Pokémon, but the best I could find was a Ditto and even a level 30 Pikachu, so I would capture them. I didn't know whether to use Zapdos or Pikachu as my main electric Pokémon. Tell me in the comments box which one you would choose. After leaving the Pokémon Mansion I considered Bulbasaur and Charmander were ready to evolve. First I got a phenomenal Venusaur, and then I would evolve Charmander into Charmeleon and into a majestic Charizard. I couldn't believe it. I had gotten the 3 Kanto starters. I didn't know how I had achieved such a feat, but I was very happy, but I still had to keep strengthening them if I intended to use them in the Pokémon League, especially in my confrontation against Red. I entered the island's gym where I had to defeat the trainers. Apparently most of them used fire-type Pokémon. After several battles, Blaine, the gym leader, had arrived, so without hesitation we began the duel. I would start with Blastoise and he would start with Magcargo, then I would immediately send out Rapidash, which was very strong, but Blastoise was able to defeat it. Magmar would be his next Pokémon, which, somehow, had electric moves that would defeat Blastoise. Finally, I would send out Feraligatr to finish off this confrontation. We had done it, we had won the Volcano badge, and with this victory, we had defeated all the gym leaders in the Kanto region. And it hadn't even taken 47 days to do it, but remember, I had a 100-day limit to prepare for my final showdown with Red, so first I had to beat the Pokémon League where they'd have new, stronger Pokémon, but before going to the Pokémon League I went to the west of the island to go to the Foam Cave where I would look for the legendary Articuno. The last legendary bird I needed to capture. Once I got to the cave I activated Flash and began my search for Articuno. I had to face several trainers, but after a lot of searching and solving mazes I had found Articuno. Or well, half of it. I would immediately try to capture it. I sent my Charizard to weaken it. Since Ice-type Pokémon are weak to Fire-type Pokémon, after weakening it, I sent Venusaur to put it to sleep, but it would fail. However, I wouldn't give up and would try to capture it by simply weakening it. After a few attempts, I would manage to capture Arctic, and thus finally have the 3 legendary birds. But without being satisfied, the time would come to go in search of the most powerful Pokémon of all. And the one I was confident in. It would help me a lot in beating the Pokémon League in Red. Let's go in search of Mutwo. If you remember, Mutwo is in the Celestial Cave, right next to Celestial City. So, I would begin a somewhat long march back to that city. And since I had plenty of days, I would take advantage of every step to face trainers and thus strengthen my team considerably. After several days had passed and after having faced many trainers I had returned to Celeste City, so I was ready to face Mutwo. I went through the north of the city and then I would turn around to go directly towards the cave. I was ready. We were about to face the strongest Pokémon of all. To make things more dramatic, instead of using the flash move I would craft a torch, which thanks to the shaders would give us a more mysterious glow in the dark. Once inside the cave I would find many Pokémon with a very high level, although none of my interest so far, and after being trapped in endless labyrinths it had finally happened. I managed to see Mutwo, so I wouldn't let him escape and I went straight towards him. Now, all of you will be wondering how I would manage to capture him. Well, if you saw the full Johto video you will know that we got one Master Ball and until now I have not used it. Well, I would have been saving it for this moment. But before using it I wanted to test its great powers with my Charizard. In effect Mutwo was very strong and with very good attacks, but the time had come I would finally use our Master Ball. And we had it. We got the strongest Pokémon of all, so it would soon join my team, and well. Now the challenge was to get out of the cave. Damn. After leaving the cave I realized what a great team we had formed. The day I had to face Red was approaching. But first I had to win the Pokémon League, so I set out to cross the entire map in search of the Pokémon League. That way I would reach Verde City where I would advance east, along Route 22. With this route I would walk directly to the Pokémon League. Here I was again, about to challenge the High Command. What new Pokémon would they have and how strong would they be, I wondered. I entered the cave that leads to the Pokémon League, where I would take the opportunity to train my Pokémon a little more. It was day 74 and I was fully ready to challenge the High Command. My final team included Charizard, Mutwo, Blastoise, Feraligatr, Venusaur, and Dragonite. I had assembled a formidable team. Comment on a scale of 1 to 10, what grade you would give my team. All prepared, I entered to challenge the High Command. The first opponent would be Mento with his Psychic-type Pokémon. I would start with Charizard, but I would switch out for Dragonite. Mento would also use several switches. But Dragonite would manage to overcome all the tests, thus defeating Mento. Without a doubt, this new confrontation against the High Command would be more complicated. The next leader would be Koga, leader of the Poison type, so without hesitation, he would send Charizard, since his fire attacks would be very efficient. However, they would manage to defeat Charizard, so I would send Dragonite, taking advantage of his diverse attacks, like Fire Fist. But Koga's Pokémon would be an interesting challenge, defeating my Dragonite, so I sent Blastoise. They weren't as effective but I would be able to withstand the poison attacks. With Blastoise I would be able to defeat Koga. While the duel was more complicated and we were just starting, the next leader would be Bruno. with fighting-type Pokémon, so this would be a good opportunity to test my legendary Mutwo. Thanks to his psychic attacks that I managed to learn, Mutwo was a great help for this confrontation. Managing to defeat all of Bruno's Pokémon, Mutwo was unstoppable. Definitely a good choice. Karen would be the new obstacle to overcome. Her Pokémon are of the dark type, so I sent Feraligatr. Thus taking advantage of her great strength, he almost defeated Karen, but he would manage to defeat my Feraligatr. So I sent Venusaur, with which I managed to finish and win this duel. Now I only needed one more duel to win the Pokémon League again. Lance, the leader of the Dragon type. Let's see how strong his Pokémon will be. I would start with my powerful Dragonite and he would send a Salamence, which managed to hurt my Dragonite too much to the point of defeating it. So, strength you want. Strength is what you will have, so I sent Feraligatr. His Salamence was very strong and resistant to attacks. But before finishing him off, Lance, I would send Garchomp, and then Salamence, which I ended up defeating. Lance would be constantly changing Pokémon, which gave me an advantage since that way I would attack without taking damage. Finally Lance would decide on Dragonite, which managed to defeat Feraligatr. Then I sent Mutwo. Let's see how it is against Dragon-type Pokémon. I defeated Dragonite with one hit, and Gyarados seemed invincible, but Mutwo was able to defeat him. Lance would send an Altaria, which almost defeated Mutwo, but I ended up defeating it. Finally Lance sent his powerful Charizard that defeated my Mutwo. So, well, you asked. I sent out my Charizard. And so a legendary duel between Charizard began, even though he had the advantage because Mutwo had previously weakened his Charizard, so my Pokémon would emerge victorious in this epic confrontation. We had done it. We managed to defeat the High Command again. This time with new Pokémon from Kanto and with stronger Pokémon from the leaders. It had only taken me 78 days to complete this part of the challenge, but there was still one more challenge left. I magically returned to my home in the Johto region. I spoke with my mother and Professor Elm to see if there was any news, but no. As you know, the challenge consists of having a limit of 100 days to prepare and challenge Red, so I still had several days of advantage, so the rest of the days I would take advantage of to strengthen my selected team, since I didn't know how powerful Red and his Pokémon would be. I entered several caves to train. I challenged many trainers. And I even returned to several gyms to face the leaders and thus gain more experience. I was on day 99, so I went in search of Red, who was in some mountains, and I was just waiting for daylight to come out and day 100 to begin. Once the big day arrived, I immediately went to Red. The final confrontation of this whole series had arrived. The decisive moment to see if we could crown ourselves the absolute leader of the world, so without further ado we began the battle. Without knowing which Pokémon Red would start with, I would send Mutwo and Red started with Pikachu. But I would switch it out for a great Snorlax. Apparently all of his Pokémon were above level 80. Mutwo easily defeated Snorlax, so Red sent a Lapras. Mutwo managed to cause a lot of damage, but I decided to switch it out for Dragonite, which I was surprised to see was defeated with a single attack. So I sent Feraligatr. But Red would switch for Venusaur. He would take advantage of Feraligatr's great strength and only use normal attacks. But Venusaur was very strong, and managed to defeat my Feraligatr. So he would avenge him with Charizard, defeating Venusaur. Red would throw Blastoise. Whoa, but what an epic confrontation we were having. Until now not a trainer had put me in such trouble as now. I wanted to give my Dragonite a second chance because it was defeated before it could attack. So I used a revive on it. Surprisingly, Blastoise finished off Charizard with a single attack. So I sent Dragonite, which had an electric attack, very effective against Blastoise, but Red switched for Lapras even though it was the same. Then I sent Charizard. Level 84. Well, however, I had intelligently put several types of attacks on my Dragonite just for this situation. I used Aqua Cola, and that's how I defeated his powerful Charizard. Red would return with his incredible Pikachu, but he was quickly defeated. Now all that's left is Blastoise, who defeated Dragonite, and I sent Venusaur. Whoa, he was almost defeated, but he finally managed to defeat him. Finally, we had managed to defeat Rojo. If I'm honest, it was a spectacular fight, and we almost didn't make it, we had completed the challenge. We defeated the High Command and Rojo in 100 days. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe and like it. I'm signing off with this epic shot.